This parsha is found in Bereshit, the 47th chapter, Genesis 47, beginning with verse 28. It's parshat Vayechi, and it is a wonderful parsha. I'm excited about speaking on this first part of this lecture. Last night I woke up about 1:30, and it's funny how the brain can be in full gear when you wake up, right? I mean, I woke up at 1:30 or so to go let one of the dogs out of the house, and by the time I sat down, my brain was in full thought process about this class. And there's so many things that I want to bring down, but I want to hit the something that I've really been dwelling on with Yaakov and this story. I titled the lecture "The Legacy," or passing on a legacy to your children. This idea of preserving a legacy. Yaakov, it says in verse 28. And it says, and Yaakov lived 17 years in the land of Egypt. The years of Yaakov's life were 147 years. 147 years, a long time. We brought down a couple of weeks ago that Yaakov's 130 years, or the years prior to going to Egypt, were not that easy. It was pretty tough. I mean, we know that for sure. It starts off with Esau, him running from Esau, him going to Shem to spend some time and study, going to Laban's house, making a deal with Laban to marry Rachel, and ends up marrying both sisters because of a little shenanigans that were going on. Work for Laban for the extra years so that he can make sure that he marries the woman that he really loves. In the process, his father-in-law attempts to persuade him to stay with him longer, and just a constant struggle. It didn't seem like that a single day didn't have a struggle in it. And then we get into Canaan, which it says that finally he makes it to Canaan. You think, okay, he can take a breath. Finally, you can take a breath. He doesn't. Joseph has problems with his brothers. Joseph has these great dreams. He tells his brothers he's 17 years old, that one day they'll all bow down to him. And they're like, yeah, that's going to happen. And in reality, Joseph's brothers were concerned that he was way out of line, because they understood his birth order. They understood where he belongs. But in reality, what did they do? They go to Dothan to consider what loophole within the Torah law could they get rid of their brother or deal with him because of this. They felt that he was out of line, and that being out of line, they needed to deal with this, because if he didn't, it would completely mess up the family and what the process for the family was. Now, what they didn't realize is this was all part of Hashem's great plan. And he gets sold into Egypt. There, while he's in Egypt, Yaakov languishes into a great depression. He loses his son. Now, I have not lost a son nor a daughter, so I wouldn't be able to tell you how it feels. But from those people that I know that have lost, especially a son or a daughter that's been lost and do not know what happened to them, i.e. kidnapping, murder, they just don't know what happened to them. There's a hole in the heart of that individual that I'm not sure can ever be resolved. Even when you know there's a death, there's a hole. I can't imagine not knowing whether they're still alive or not. Yaakov ends up finding out that Joseph is alive, goes to Egypt, the best days of his life, spends the most wonderful years. Those wonderful years were years of teaching Ephraim the Torah. His little grandson, little tow-headed boy, would come to the tent of Yaakov. And can you imagine how wonderful those last 17 years in Egypt was? That he could spend every day teaching that young boy the Torah. And he had a great vivacious attitude towards studying and learning from his grandfather. And that 147 years were not wasted years. And even though we look at it as a struggle, and you go, why is it that righteous people have to struggle so much? Can I tell you that that is part of righteousness? The tzaddikim have to struggle. That is part of being a tzaddik. Gold is not refined unless it hits fire. Silver is not polished unless it's gone through some process of great refinement. And we understand that if you desire to have great levels of righteousness, if you expect at any level to be a righteous individual, it requires refinement. However, there is a prayer in Judaism. Each time that Jews gather to pray, there's a prayer that is included in that prayer that says, Hashem, do not allow me to be tempted above my measure that I can pass the test. Because we all know that temptation is a fantastic thing and it can refine us, but we also know that temptation and struggle in our life can have the potential to absolutely destroy us. I think all of it depended upon the individual. But what did Yaakov leave to his sons and Manasseh and Ephraim? What did he leave these boys? He leaves these boys a legacy of triumph, struggle and triumph. He leaves them a legacy that is going to be passed down when he blesses his sons, because in this portion is where Yaakov blesses his sons. And we won't get into the actual blessing until, we won't get into it this week. I'll try to cover some of it since Wednesday's class is canceled. But we will understand the sort of meat of the obligation to bring about a legacy for our own children. It's very important. For many of us, our children are already gone and out of the house. But there still is a great opportunity for us to bring a legacy to those children by our lifestyle. Yaakov teaches his young boys in his lifestyle how to have the greatest adversity and still not crumble under the adversity. Yaakov teaches his sons that even in the midst of the worst of conflict between the siblings, the boys, Yaakov does not disintegrate into that fray. He doesn't become part of their problem. He becomes part of resolving the problem. Even in the story where Yaakov tells his brothers about the dream, what does Yaakov tell to Joseph? He sort of plays it down, doesn't he, in front of his brothers. Why is he doing that? Because he's understanding the dynamics between sons and the importance of making sure that that legacy is passed on to his sons. So it says in verse 29, the days approached for Israel to die. He summoned his son Joseph and said to him, if I have found favor now in your eyes, place your hand under my thigh. Does it sound familiar? Where else do we see this imagery? Abraham, right? And we see it as an oath to the covenant, right? Does it make sense? An oath to the covenant. He says, place your hand under my thigh and grant me a good truth. Do not bury me in Egypt. Do not, when I lie down with my fathers, transport me out of Egypt and bury me in their place. He said, as I will do as you said. He said, affirm to me. So he affirmed for him. Then Israel bowed his head to the bed. I guess the last parting action of instruction that I see so powerful in passing a legacy to your children is making sure that they understand that though you might be in Mitzrayim, you don't want to be there. You're never comfortable where you're at. You follow me? There is an attitude of spiritual excellence in each one of us. The Ramchal sort of deals with these same ideas in the Path of the Just, that there are some people who will live up to a great potential, what they are, that they can achieve. But everyone has the ability to be a great tzaddik. Everybody has the ability to be a tzaddik at their level. But many people fail to even rise up to another level because they just are comfortable in Mitzrayim. They're comfortable in a foreign place. They're comfortable in a land that is not theirs. And one of the things that I really feel so strongly about is that every one of us who really do want to draw close to Hashem, we are at some level fighting against the system of the world that wants to to form us into that worldly system, and we're constantly fighting against that. That's part of the struggle of the Yetzer Hara and Yetzer Tov, right? It's the struggle between Yaakov and Esau. It's the struggle between the good and the bad. And here Yaakov, in the day of his near the time of his death, he lets his son know, this has been great being here. I really appreciate the hospitality for the last 17 years. It's been wonderful spending the time with my grandkids, but don't you leave my corpse in this land. Don't leave me in this land. Do your children know, even though many of them are grown, how serious you are about being connected to Hashem? See, that's the key. Sure, it was wonderful to have him buried with his fathers in the land, but this was about Yaakov's connection to Hashem. You have to realize that Yaakov wrestled with an angel. He wrestled with an angel in a supernatural event in which Hashem himself comes down, and even in an event where he comes down and finds a sacred place where he says, surely this is the house of God. This is the place where Hashem rests. His Shekhinah is here. This happened a long time before all of his children came around, that first incident, right? Yet Yaakov is still holding on to this concept. I received something in a great supernatural download one day. And I want to let them know that that connection is very real. Even though I'm dying and my last breath will be taken on this bed, do not leave me in Egypt. There's an attitude that we should go by. And he says that he bowed at the head of his bed. One of the sages says that this is possibly, Onkelos actually goes on to sort of bring down the idea that Joseph's dream is fulfilled. It says that his father, remember this when he talks about the moon and the stars, and that they bow down. That's the concept that we see here. Verse 48, chapter 1. After these things, it had happened that someone said to Joseph, behold, your father is ill. Many of the sages say that this person was Ephraim, who came to Joseph because Ephraim was the one who was studying with his grandfather, and he knew the state of his grandfather. It says, behold, your father is ill. He led his two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, with him. Someone told Yaakov and said, behold, your son Joseph has come to you, which probably, even though it was a bit not very clear, it seems that Ephraim was the one who goes to his grandfather and says, Yaakov is here. And behold, your son Yaakov has come to you. Israel himself strengthened himself and sat up on his bed. Yaakov said to Joseph, El Shaddai has revealed to me in Luz, in the land of Canaan, and he blessed me. Now, do you remember what we talked about before we got to this? That Yaakov wanted to remind him of his first incident and where he touched the very presence of Hashem in a dream or in his sleep. This is it. This is where he recognized that God was El Shaddai. What does El Shaddai mean? Do we know? Who knows? Pop quiz. Yes. The nurturing one, right? The one who's going to supply, the one who will take care of, right? This is where Yaakov said to him, I will go and I will return, but you have to take care of me. You have to make sure that I can make it back here. So he truly discovered the self-sufficient nature of the creator of the universe in his ability to sustain you in whatever difficulty you have. What he's getting ready to pass to his sons is a legacy of knowing Hashem as El Shaddai. If there's anything that we can teach our children, whether they are able to rise to higher levels or not, it's neither here nor there. What's important is, can your children understand that in the time of their difficulties, they turn to the creator of the universe. They've discovered that he's actually the one who can take them through these very difficult situations. He said to me, behold, I will make you numerous and increase you. I will make you an assembly of tribes. I will give you this land to your children after you for an everlasting possession. Now, who is he talking to? He's talking to Joseph. Now, The question is why didn't he bless Joseph? Why didn't Joseph come in and ask for a blessing? Well, in essence, if you bless your children, if your children are blessed, then you are blessed. Okay, so the idea is, in essence, Joseph is being blessed here. Now your 2 sons who were born to you in the land of Egypt before I came to you in Egypt are mine. This is Yaakov saying, your 2 sons are mine. Ephraim and Manasseh are like Reuben and Simeon to me. Your offspring that you will beget after them are yours. They will be called by whose names? By the name of Israel, correct? And their brothers in their inheritance. As for me, when I came from Padan, Rachel died to me in the land of Canaan, and on the way, while there was still a distance of land to come in Ephrat. I buried her there on the way of Ephrat, which is in Bethlehem. Now, why do you think Yaakov is bringing this up right now? Came out of nowhere, do you think? Do you think it's possible that he's looking at Joseph's face and going, hold on a second, you want me to take you out of Egypt, but you buried mom on the highway? You see what I'm saying? I'm just trying to understand this. That's possibly the reason why Yaakov is answering this question that's not being asked. Because he's realizing, I can see the look on my son's face. And he's explaining there's a purpose behind it. Now the sages say that Yaakov buried her because Hashem commanded him to bury her there. So when the tribes are in exile on the way, they have to pass her tomb. Which is true. They did. They did have to do that. Your offspring will beget you after the Israel saw Joseph's son, and he said, who are these? Joseph said to his father, they are my sons, whom the Lord has given me here. Now, what did he mean by who are these? Well, by this, we know his eyes had dimmed, and he wasn't able to see very well. But at some level, Yaakov was in sort of a prophetic state. And Yaakov could see that there were 3 or 4 descendants of these boys that would turn out to be potential disasters for the nation of Israel. Big potential disasters. And in this vision they saw, he's asking, oh my goodness, who are these men that are going to come after him? It also could be a grandfather's sort of loving way of poking at grandchildren. Have you ever done that? Like, who are these little rascals? Could be that. Could be a number of things. But one thing for sure, the sons are placed before his father. Joseph said to his father, these are my sons, whom the Lord has given me here. And he said, bring them now, come close to me, and I will bless them. The eyes of Israel were dim because of old age, and he could not see. He brought them close to them, and he kissed and embraced them. Israel said to Joseph, I never hoped to see your face. I never hoped to see your face, and behold, the Lord has let me see your children as well. Meaning there's another word that could be, instead of hope, could have said, which could be translated, I've prayed and never thought I would see your face, but here now I see your children. Joseph removed them from before him, and he bowed down on his face on the ground as he waited. Joseph led both of them, Ephraim to the right, and Israel to Israel's left hand, and Manasseh to the left hand, which is Israel's right, and brought them close to them. Now, why in this configuration? The eldest was to be the one to be blessed first, and the second, Ephraim, second. But instead, Israel changes his hands. He swaps them over. Now, Joseph, thinking he made a mistake because he's just a blind old man, which you know that this is not the case, he is going to assist his father, and he's corrected by his father. Before I move on, I'm going to give you a little antidote that's really important to me personally. I had a dear friend of mine. Well, let me just say this. Many people will listen to this and think, wow, I didn't raise my children to have this kind of connection to Hashem. So for me to actually lay my hands on them and do anything like this would be just a little weird. Or if I walked up to my grandchildren before I left and say, let me bless you, it would be just a little odd. I had a dear friend of mine He was diagnosed with terminal cancer, and we watched him go downhill over a couple of years or so. And those last few weeks was to watch him struggle with every breath of his being, every fiber of his being was a struggle just to breathe. He was a fighter. There's a reason why he lasted so long. And if you know people that has died with cancer, if you're a fighter, you can last a long time in the state. And I get a phone call one evening that says, he wants you to come. And when I get there, he says, it's time for me to go. And so the doctors were going to just send him home to hospice, but we couldn't make it out of the intensive care, so they put him in a room until we could get transportation to the house. But then the doctor said, he's too unstable, we can't move him to the house. He wanted to die at the house. So we called all of his family members in, and during all of this, he was in a spiritual euphoria. That's all I can explain. He was talking to the other side. He would be saying, I see the, like he said, he saw candelabras or candlelights. And he'd say, oh, they're so beautiful. And he would be singing. He would start singing songs. Just incredible to watch this transition. And if you've ever been with someone that's died in a righteous state, it's incredible. But you see, this man was not a very spiritually intuitive man before this. This is a man that would knock you out in the heartbeat if you crossed him. He wasn't a violent man. He was just a man that was a, fiery individual. He's a good man. He'd give you the shirt off his back, but don't double cross him, right? He'll give you a piece of his mind. But he wasn't a very spiritual man. He wasn't in tune spiritually. And when he went through this process, one of the things I over and over emphasized to him, please do not leave this life without giving your children a legacy. What did I mean by that? It wasn't about his house. It wasn't about his boats, his businesses. It wasn't about his assets. He needed to leave this earth with his children having a legacy of godliness. And he didn't have that. Does that make sense? Now, he would say he loved God, but he really didn't show much interest. And I watched over this 3-year period of time dive into understanding and studying God. And then a period of time of his greatest suffering, his wife would recollect him being in the closet, and he would bury himself with clothes. And he would weep for hours on end, not for God to remove the pain, but that he would understand and know God and to connect to Hashem. The most incredible, incredible thing. A legacy began to be developed in this man. And as I watched, I saw a man that went from a very rough guy who was able to survive over 38 days on the Pacific, floating on the keel of a boat with his father and survive, to a man who spent the last few months of his life taking one short breath at a time, all with an attitude of righteousness that was beyond anything you could say. It was a saint. I would have never thought that this man could have ever been at this place. In just a short time, completely refined to a level that many of us probably will not be able to achieve. It was about 8:30 that night, and his daughters walked into the room, and he was sort of in and out of consciousness, not really recognizing anybody in the room. And as soon as his daughters come in, we said, hey, your daughters are here. And he just kind of woke up, and he says, I want to bless them. And, excuse me. He says, I want to bless them. Now, mind you, this is a man that's so weak, he can't even set up in the bed. He can't move his limbs hardly. And so several of us men grab him up, and he's a bag of bones, just a bag of bones. And we lift him up, and his daughters come and kneel before the bed. And we take each one of his arms and one on each head of his daughter. And there he pronounced the most beautiful, beautiful blessing over his daughters. That they would always know their God. And he says, when I leave here and take my last breath, he says, know that the only thing that I take with me is my relationship with God. The most beautiful legacy. Now, why did I give you this antidote? today. We have to understand that this is just not a Bible story. This isn't just a story of Yaakov blessing his sons and grandsons. This is about Yaakov realizing that I am leaving my sons in Egypt. I'm leaving them in a place that I don't want them to be. I want them to know, don't leave me here. Don't leave me in this place. Meaning also, I don't want you to be in this place. Later on, we realize that Yaakov sees a vision of the days to come. And there, as he goes to speak, the Spirit of Hashem came and pulled his soul out of him. What did he see? Possibly the suffering of his children, the suffering of his grandchildren, his great-grandchildren, as they had to go through slavery. And at the same time, I'm sure that he knew and clung to the great promise that he had from Hashem, that he knew that Hashem was El Shaddai. Right? So he wasn't taking his last breath without any hope. He was taking his last breath knowing that Hashem is going to bring them through it, but you just don't want to see your children suffer. And there he tells Ephraim that he is going to multiply the nations. He's going to scatter through the nations. The imagery I gave you the other night with Hashem's hand coming down on the Beis HaMikdash, which radiated the only light to the world. And in 70 A.D., a fist came down and sparks flew all over the nations. Today, you and I sit here because Yaakov laid his hand on Ephraim's head and gave him the blessing. Do you catch me? You are here today because Yaakov didn't want to be in Egypt. And the reason why that every Israelite is blessed to this day at Shabbos, and they say to their sons, may you be like Ephraim and Manasseh, is because what they're saying is, may you have the fortitude and the ability during the greatest and most difficult of exile to maintain your identity, to continue to study Torah in the midst of Egypt. In the greatest of exile, you must be the brightest spark that you can be. But it's not just about being a spark, it's about igniting the little sparks in the nations. Today, you and I are studying Torah in such an illuminated way because Yaakov could see the future. And he made that decision to switch hands. What did he see? He sees in Yaakov, he sees in Ephraim Joshua, one of his descendants, who has the great study and the love for Torah that he spent all of his time in Moshe's tent and took the mantle of Moshe over and was able to carry them over. What did he see in Manasseh? He saw Gideon, but he realized Gideon was not the kind of guy that I need to make sure that carries on this great blessing. And so today, that very same spirit, that very same spark that is in the nations is being erected right now. The great promise of the fulfillment of the nations is taking place right now, and it comes from this text and it comes from this blessing. So if you want to know that why one day, all of a sudden, your neshama woke up, is because Yaakov laid his hand on Ephraim and passed a legacy to that young boy. We have a responsibility to our children and our grandchildren to pass on this great legacy, the knowledge of Hashem. This is not about trying to make each one of your children Hasidim, right? This is not trying to make them Jews for the non-Jew. This is about connecting your children to a place and your grandchildren to understand that God is the provider. He is the one that will take care of them through thick or thin. And that is the key, my friend, when we realize that we have a responsibility and a legacy, not just to ourselves, but to our children. So let me review this in closing. before Yaakov could lay his hand on Ephraim, which is the end of the line, if you understand. Before Yaakov could pronounce to Manasseh and Ephraim that they will be like the eldest sons, Reuben and Simeon, Yaakov had to first have an El Shaddai moment at Luz. If we ourselves do not have that profound moment in which we connect to Hashem, until we've wrestled with our own angels, you understand? Until we've gone through our own struggles and discovered our own connection, then what good is your blessing and legacy? You haven't anything to pass. Can you imagine a person spending his entire life thinking nothing but about himself? To us in this room, it's repulsive, right? We can't even conceive that idea. But there are plenty of people that have plenty of money in the bank for their children. They have college funds for their children, but they're leaving their children spiritually bankrupt. They don't know God. They don't know. They don't have a connection. They have no clue. Today, you and I must approach this next year that we're coming into with a new sense of purpose that I have got to connect my children. If you do not have children yet, and people that are watching may not have children yet, they have got to understand if you don't have children, this is still about your children. You need a connection. You need to become the greatest, most righteous person you can become. This is about your connection with Hashem in the generations that come. And little do we know the power of the decisions you make. And I love this verse in closing. I'm constantly reminded of this. And I use this often in illustration. Hashem says that He will be faithful to 1,000 generations to those who love Him. So think of this. 1,000 generations. It's a long time. Now what does 1,000 mean? It's a complete number. Meaning regardless of how you and I first started this journey and where we came into this world, our neshamas, somewhere down the road, some wonderful matriarch or patriarch was faithful to Hashem. That's why you're here. If you think we can actually take credit for this, that we're kind of fooling ourselves. Somewhere down the line, could be in an old mud hut somewhere. Everybody else around them's pagan, but they were absolute righteous, and they knew that there was one God, and they kept what faith they had. You never know. But that one person could have been the very spark for your neshama. And today, you can be that person that can secure the future for your children and your children's children. Baruch Hashem.